Mr. Speaker, we do not think that slurs against trans Americans, against indigenous Argentinians, against Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar are isolated and innocuous incidents. We tell you that every act contributes to a culture of hatred which deprives individuals of their rights and makes people even more vulnerable to harm. Today, we're going to propose to you that it absolutely should be a criminal offence that all comments that promote hatred against minorities and vulnerable groups should be criminalised. Two arguments to you today, Mr. Speaker. We're going to first talk to you about why this is principally justified and why hate crimes are principally unjust. And secondly, we're going to talk to you about the practical benefits of our side. Firstly, about hate crimes and principle on justification, but a little bit before that, our model. We think we propose to you a 4-point model today. Firstly, we tell you that we're happy for this penalty to escalate according to the scale of the crime. Secondly, that people who publicise these, things like people who have platforms to perpetuate these stereotypes and racist views, or sexist views, no thank you, will probably get, we're happy to go up to jail time. Thirdly, we think criminal court will decide this, and arbitration courts, etc. And lastly, we think that we're going to have the same standards that are currently used for hate crimes. We think those similar standards that we use for them will be applied to hate speech. We're happy for that to go as far as it needs to. For example, we just think that if comments are made based on characteristics of an entire peoples, we classify that as hate speech, and we're happy to ban that altogether. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, on why this is so principally unjustified for us to support hate crime and hate speech. No, thank you. We bring you two strands today. We tell you firstly that hate crime limits other people's rights. We tell you that for this reason, we are happy to curtail one right if it means that we're going to save others. And secondly, we're going to tell you why a duty of care exists on the part of the state. Firstly, on limiting rights. What is generally acceptable in society, Mr. Speaker? We tell you that it's generally not accepted, even by the most liberal conception, that having rights means curtailing other people's rights. And we tell you that this falls in, that hate crime and hate speech falls under this category.
Hello.
We tell you that it becomes a criminal offence when we start to harm other people's rights and their access to certain things. And that's why we think that hate crime and hate speech falls under this. For example, we think it's okay for you to have a car, we think that's a good right, we think it's all right for you to drive around in that car, but if you steal someone else's car, violate their property rights, that's when we start criminalising these things. So why does hate speech fall here? We think firstly, it actively incites harm. We think this applies largely across the spectrum of all hate speech, whether it's a derogatory comment or like a politician actively perpetuating very negative stereotypes about people. No, thank you. For example, we think that we're Geert Wilders reviles Turkish immigrants and all people of Turkish descent that actively harms people. Why do we think this is? And why do we think it applies to the spectrum, even to journalists like Katie Hopkins, who just call all immigrants cockroaches? We tell you that it's likely that when we hear views like this being perpetuated in society, whether it's from a neighbour or from a politician, we're likely to associate whole peoples with negative stereotypes. We think this is entirely dehumanizing for them, and this is why it's a problem. We tell you it's a problem when you're in a bar fight with someone, and if it's a Syrian person or a person from Middle Eastern descent, and you have negative stereotypes associated with them, and thank you, it's more likely that you're going to act on those biases. It's more likely that you're going to physically harm them when you have these negative stereotypes against them. So, because people are far more vulnerable to harm, we tell you today that it's a failure of the state to actively protect people when they allow hate crime and hate speech to exist in society, when you allow people to be made more vulnerable and therefore other people to act on said biases. We tell you it's a failure of the state and they fail their duty of care. Yes.
Are you saying you're going to punish people for their speeches because it might lead to hate crime against them?
Here's what we tell you, and this is the nuance that they literally just missed in my speech. We tell you that even though the act of hate speech may not directly lead to that, we tell you that you're making them more vulnerable. You're putting them in a position where it's more likely for them to be harmed. And for that reason, we tell you that, on principle, this doesn't really need any more explanation. Secondly, about why this is equal to physical harm. We tell you that in society, we severely punish people who cause physical harm to others. Why is hate speech similar to this? We tell you that speech causes is equal to causing physical harm. No, thank you, because we actively harm your ability to live. For example, we think that if you're punched, you're incapacitated to a certain extent. We tell you that hate speech does the same thing, but in other ways. We tell you that when you're a victim of verbal abuse, it means that you don't have access to certain things because people have bad perceptions of you, bad stereotypes associated with you. We tell you that harms your ability to live because it means that let's say you're a Turkish man going to buy a house, and like whoever's renting the house to you has negative perceptions of you. They think it's totally acceptable to deny you that right, and for that reason you suffer and your standard of life suffers. It means that you're completely unable to work and function in society. We tell you that this ranges not just in like politician circles, not just in the media, but we tell you it's as simple as kids who suffer from like trans children who suffer from huge anxiety, huge depression. We tell you that these are just more likely to happen in minority groups. It's more likely to happen when they aren't able to use safe spaces. What does this mean, Mr. Speaker? No, thank you. We tell you it means two things. Firstly, we tell you that it means that when the state doesn't ban hate crimes and hate speech, they actively harm your right to live. They actively curtail your rights. And secondly, no thank you, we tell you that if most liberties, even if like China comes up here and tells us that they want most liberties to be preserved in society, we get that better on our side. Why is that? A small curtailing of the freedom of speech still allows huge numbers of people to access more things. So on net, we think we get more rights on our side of the house and more liberties, yes.
Would you punish the one speaker who said a hate speech, or would you also punish everyone who agrees to that hate speech?
We tell you that the people who are already acting on that hate speech will be punished. We tell you that crowds that go and like mob a bunch of people will definitely be punished, and like we're happy for the politicians to be too, as long as they like act on their biases. We think that totally like fulfills this criteria. Secondly, on why like the state has a duty to better protect the most vulnerable and why this is practically sound. We tell you that we already told you about the principal justification of as to why this policy make sure that we don't incite violence, no thank you. We tell you that practically fewer people are harmed. Objectively, that's a good thing. But secondly, and most importantly, we tell you that when people are harmed, when you allow hate speech to perpetuate a culture of discrimination, it means that people don't have access to even more rights than before. We think this exists in things like job discrimination and political discrimination. No thank you. We tell you that like when an employer is like part of a culture of hatred, we think that you're less likely to be able to access jobs. It means when you show up to the interview, before you even speak a word, there's also already a stigma against you. It means that politicians, for example, are less likely to empathize with you. It means that they don't want to represent you, even if you're one of their constituents, even if you're a voter. We tell you that for this reason, people are excluded from political discourse almost entirely because of preconceptions that team opposition is not able to stop. Note, Mr. Speaker, the nuance in this argument. We tell you that most people are not racist. We don't think that like most people have terrible perceptions of other people, but we tell you that biases exist, and those underlying biases, when the government does not really make an effort to stop them from existing, we tell you that these biases actively harm people and hurt their rights. Why would this change at all? We tell you that it's self-perpetuating. People tend to sort of associate it with groups with similar views, and for that reason, bigots will never really have a chance to be exposed to other views. We tell you that on our side, without this bias, without hate speech, we have a clearer conversation about issues of discrimination. We tell you that hate speech ceases to exist. We tell you that we get better discourse, we get better politics, and we get better justice for all, and for these reasons we are very proud to propose.